If you've ever said to yourself, I will never do that again, and do the exact same thing the next day, this video might hurt, but it's going to set you free. You're closer to profitability than what you think, but you just need to stop repeating the same silly mistakes every day. In this video, I'm going to show you how to break the mental loop that keeps you sabotaging your own trading success. Now, if you find this video useful, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the free resource in the description below. Now, there are two main parts to your brain. You have a process-based strategic human, which is referred to as the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that's responsible for making wise, objective decisions according to a process and according to taking in data on what decision will be most supportive to your overall mission and to your overall goal. We also have our limbic system, the amygdala, the chimp, which is responsible for survival. Its pure purpose is keeping you alive. Now, the limbic system is, from an anthropological standpoint and an evolutionary standpoint, the more important part of the brain, because thousands of years ago, our ancestors were in constant life-threatening situations. So they needed a hardwired survival response that would keep them alive in those types of situations. Now, human nature never gets rid of old things, it just builds new layers on top of. So each and every single one of us, when we come to the market, have the limbic system, the amygdala, the chimp, still heavily wired. And if we don't learn how to manage that, it's going to fire first. Our survival response will fire first before before our prefrontal cortex. This is exactly why when you look back on certain decisions, you seeing them from more of an objective standpoint, and the emotions have calmed down, and you're questioning with regret and guilt, why did I make that decision in the heat of the moment? Well, the reason you did was because you were hijacked by the limbic system, the amygdala, the chimp. And it's a trader's ability to manage the limbic system in the times that it matters that allows them to actually stop making the same repeating silly errors that cost them their consistent profitability. It's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do in this video. Now, the prefrontal cortex is more of an integrated part of the brain. And the integration means that it doesn't see pleasure and pain as split. It sees them as integrated. It doesn't see win and loss as separate. It sees them as integrated. And it allows and encompasses both sides of the outcome. For example, when you're trading, it encompasses both a win and a loss, but it knows that making that decision, irrespective of the win and loss, is the wise decision according to your plan. So the human is more integrated. It's more executive. It's more strategic. And there's no polarities. There's no seeking after a pleasure and trying to avoid a pain. But what it is I have a plan, I have a process, and I'm going to make the decision that aligns with that plan and that process. Whereas the amygdala, the chimp, the emotional limbic part of your brain is constantly trying to separate and split. And it's constantly trying to label things good and bad. And it's constantly trying to label pleasure and pain. And it's constantly trying to seek after pleasure and avoid pain, just as a survival response. Again, thousands of years ago, from an evolutionary standpoint, this is very necessary because the amygdala, the chimp, had to get very good at labeling that thing that was behind them as a threat or a predator so we could kickstart a fight or flight autonomic response, get adrenaline and cortisol up, get the blood from the internal organs to the periphery of the muscles. So it was primed for a fight or flight response and it was able to survive. But nowadays, with our trading in an apartment, air-conditioned apartment, we don't have those same life-threatening situations. We have to get very good at learning to integrate what the amygdala is constantly trying to break up and split and separate. So the chimp wants to label a certain thing bad and try and attempt to avoid it as a survival response. It also wants to label things good and try and seek after it. It's like the amygdala wanted to label prey good and again have that same fight or flight response fired up. So it was primed to capture its dinner. So the amygdala and the chimp, the emotional parts and your emotions serve a purpose. They serve a deep, deep purpose, but their function is primarily for survival. And if you don't learn how to manage the survival parts of your brain, you'll never be able to put the prefrontal cortex in place and manage and embrace probabilistic thinking and embrace sticking to your process and mechanical plan. And again, if you're trading in an apartment, the need for the emotional, uh, exaggerating chimp in a survival response is very, very low. So we need to learn how to quiet this part of our brain down, integrate the opposites as a way to have higher functions. Now, all your trading psychology issues can be explained from an evolutionary perspective. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Let's not talk about trading for now. Let's talk about somewhere down the evolutionary path and timeline. Uh, Humans were supposedly chimps or monkeys, and let's imagine, just as an easy analogy, there's a monkey here, and this monkey doesn't have any, or has very little prefrontal cortex, any sort of functions there. If any, they have an amygdala that seeks after pleasure and avoid pain. And again, every human has that, but we also have the capacity to put our prefrontal cortex in charge and quiet down those impulses and instincts. But a monkey doesn't. So let's say a monkey has their uh, desire for pleasure and avoidance of pain. And let's say someone comes up to that monkey and sort of shows them a banana or shows them a meal that the monkey's really excited about. And the monkey anchors in their mind there's a pleasure. And they have a very elated state, and you'll see them actually react impulsively to try and capture after that banana. But then let's imagine after that anchor is set and that monkey's really excited about that banana is taken away. And there's a certain catalyst there. And because they had such a strong expectation of a pleasure, of receiving a pleasure, now all of a sudden when that's taken away, they have extreme pain. And that catalyst there, that trigger, puts them in a state of tilt. It puts them in a state of an emotional state where now they're angry or they're frustrated or they have unmet expectations because they're not getting that banana they thought they were going to get. And then in that state of tilt, they have mechanisms that they exhibit and things they do and behaviors they exhibit as a coping mechanism for that tilt. And this state of tilt here is a state of frustration and anger and unmet expectation. So what are they sitting there calm and poised? No, of course not. They're getting angry, they're throwing a fit, they're moving around, they're trying to attack, they're getting aggressive. These so-called destructive behaviors are not really destructive, but what they are is a coping mechanism for that unwanted state. So again, as opposed to trying to label behavior good or bad, I'm trying to help understand why we participate in certain behaviors. I'm going to translate this into trading in a second. But that monkey or that chimp has that amygdala fired up and it's behaving. We label it erratic, we label it destructive behavior, but that's only because we're trying to make that monkey fit our stereotype of good behavior, which is so-called kind and calm and all that type of stuff. But this monkey is going ballistic to cope with this unwanted state. And then the chimp has some sort of a guilt or a shame mechanism. All animals can feel guilt and shame and a certain burden mechanism. And because they don't have the capacity to integrate that part of their brain, because they don't have higher functions like humans do, they're going to repeat that behavior. They're constantly going to repeat that behavior because next time the catalyst, the trigger is in place, they're going to go into tilt and they're going to do the same behavior as a coping mechanism. And then they're going to feel a burden and then they're going to repeat the same behavior. And anything you feel guilty for, you're going to repeat because you're consciously aware of the drawbacks of the behavior. You're unconscious of the motive, the benefit. You don't see how this behavior is a coping mechanism for this. So you continue repeating the behavior. But again, the chimp doesn't have the capacity to see that higher function like we humans do. So let's translate this into trading. Our animalistic reactions when we're fired up isn't too dissimilar from a chimp. And we have the same amygdala impulse and instinct response that a chimp does, yet we over time have developed higher functions that have been layered on top of that limbic system. And we have the ability to calm that down at times because what happens when we're trading is there's some sort of a catalyst, there's some sort of a trigger. Maybe it's a loss when we expect it to be a win. Remember how the chimp has that win way up or that gain of a banana way up on a pedestal, and when that's yanked away, they have extreme pain. What we do as traders is we put this idea of the win being a massive pleasure in our mind and paying rent, paying bills, being able to pass a funded challenge, being able to get status and recognition in the community. And we have those expectations on the individual trades, And the moment that's taken away from us, we have extreme pain and we're triggered into an emotional state. And by the way, my free Bulletproof Your Trading Mindset 2.0 tool, it's the free link in the description, is a tool that actually helps you dissolve these catalysts and dissolve these triggers. Because I show you how to identify and remove these positive expectations, unrealistic expectations on the individual trade. So you, irrespective of the outcome, you don't react. You react less. So because traders go in with unrealistic expectations of that individual trade being a pleasurable win and then getting all these things from these trades, even unconsciously, when the inevitable loss comes through, they're thrown on tilt. And the tilt is a state of feeling like they're on the back foot, they're in drawdown, and they're in pain, anxiety. And the reason they're experiencing all these uh, negative emotions is because of unmet expectations. The market didn't align with the expectation they'd set prior to getting into that trade. And in that state of tilt and emotion, anxiety, anger, frustration, feeling like you're in the back foot, we fire up our amygdala. That survival response kickstarts because our amygdala literally thinks we're in a life-threatening situation. The amygdala can't differentiate between a trading loss and between a life-threatening situation. So when we have unmet expectations, just like the monkey example before, and things don't go as we expected, and we're triggered into a certain what the amygdala perceives as a survival harmful situation, that same fight or flight response is kickstarted. Our amygdala fires up, all the blood glucose and oxygen goes to the higher to the lower functions in the brain, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex shuts down. You lose a lot of your executive function because of the uh, triggered by unrealistic expectations. And then we have over trading, we have revenge trading, we have over risking, we have all these so-called destructive behaviors, trading outside of your plan, all these so-called mistakes that we label mistakes and we judge ourselves for these behaviors we don't like are a coping mechanism for this unwanted state of tilt that was triggered by a certain catalyst, which is usually an unmet expectation because we had one-sided expectations on that individual trade to be a positive, pleasurable win. And then we end up participating in these chimp-like behaviors, over risking, trading way more than what we should, taking multiple losses as a result. And then we guilt ourselves, we beat ourselves up, we think there's something wrong with us. And we live in this burden where now we're consciously aware of the drawbacks, unconscious of the benefits of our behavior. We don't see the unconscious motive in that moment. Where the motive we have to doing silly, so-called silly destructive behaviors, our chimp-like behavior, is all a coping mechanism for this unwanted state. So if we don't see that connection, then we're going to judge our behavior. And when we judge our behavior and label our behavior negative and we apologize and we feel guilty and we feel shameful for our behavior, you know you're going to repeat it. Because you repeat it because you're consciously aware of the drawbacks, you're unaware of the unconscious benefits, the motive you have to doing that behavior in the first place. So then when you're triggered again into an unwanted state, you repeat the same behavior and the cycle goes on. So how do you actually stop this cycle? It's really not that difficult. You just have to itemize the individual charges. Firstly, you want to use the Bulletproof Your Trading Mindset 2.0 tool to remove those initial anchors. That's going to help you stop being triggered into an unwanted state. Then when you're triggered, if you are triggered into an unwanted state, you want to find alternative, viable strategies to deal with states of anxiety, states of stress, states of feeling like you're in the back foot that don't involve trading. Because in your mind, you only see one option to dealing with this, which is getting back into the market and doing silly things. But if you now create in your mind alternative, viable strategies to deal with these unwanted states of tilt, things like meditation, things like deep breathing, things like talking to your trading psychology coach, things like managing these things using some of the tools I share on this channel. There are multiple different ways to deal with tilt that don't involve you jumping back in the market. Because then when you see these alternative viable strategies, you deploy a few of them and then you be patient and you wait for the next opportunity that really aligns with your plan. So you don't feel forced to jump back into the market when you're on tilt. And then when you have those alternative strategies, you can actually calm down your chimp significantly and those destructive behaviors. You find yourself not participating in those destructive behaviors as much. And then when you see that these behaviors, these so-called destructive trading behaviors, aren't actually destructive, they're just a coping mechanism for an unwanted state, then you stop burdening yourself with guilt, but you now understand the unconscious motive. And when you understand the unconscious motive, you can put alternative strategies in place and the cycle breaks, because instead of being triggered into a tilt and then participating in these behaviors, you stop yourself here. Sometimes you even stop yourself here with the bulletproof your trading mindset tool. You'll maybe stop 80% here, and then 20% will go through. But then those 20% of times that you get on tilt, you have viable alternative strategies to deploy. So you don't participate in these destructive behaviors, you participate in your viable alternative strategies. So traders, this is how you stop sabotaging patterns and behaviors. If you have any questions, let me know below. But before you click away, I want you to go into the description and download the free resource there. That tool is going to help you identify and dissolve triggers in real time, so you can be sticking to your trading plan and scaling up without having emotional boom and busts. And then what I want you to do is I want you to click the video that's going to pop on your screen next and give that a watch. It's a 15-minute video where I elaborate more on this principle and these tools to help you bulletproof your trading mindset, so you're ready for funding and you're ready to scale up and get payouts from the market.